All right, so we are here to talk about The Boys, the new hardcover omnibus editions that we have just put out. You can pick those up via Kickstarter or Indiegogo. There's some extra stuff up there, some signed comics, some signed versions. You can also support your local comic shop. Volume 1 should have been in stores last week. Volume 2 in stores this week, and Volume 3 next week. And as Garth and I were just saying, we went from 12 volumes originally of The Boys trade paperbacks to 6 volumes, now to 3. And you had mentioned that you had done that with DC did that slightly with Preacher. They got it down to 2, and ultimately this is kind of your preferred way of seeing a long form body of work.
Yes, I think so. I mean, definitely the collection rather than the individual issue. That's something I've learned, something I learned on Preacher, actually, where you have to start to think in terms of the thing's life beyond the monthly comic. You have to think of its life really in perpetuity, and that means the collection. And to my mind, that means the smallest number of books possible. So long as you're not creating some behemoth that's going to be impossible to lift. But I think these new omnibus, or omnibus, as a friend of mine likes to call them, do sort of realize that notion in fine style.
Yeah, I'm partial to omnibuy, but I'm not sure if any of those are correct. It's a very awkward word, and it probably isn't being used correctly by anybody when it comes to this type of stuff, but maybe not. When you started this, boy, I guess I was actually just looking at dates, and it's like, was it 2007, 2006, 2007, 2008, somewhere around there where the first comics came out from Wildstorm?
I think it was 2006.
Okay, that sounds about right.
I'd been thinking about it sort of roughly, vaguely for 4 or 5 years before that, and in more definite terms, probably 2004 onwards. It was 2006, I think, the latter half of that year, that the 6 issues saw print, at which point things came to a grinding halt.
And when they came to that grinding halt, did you ever imagine, there's a couple of different things, and I'll ask both questions, but one is, working on a comic series, even though that comic series had initially an abrupt end that the creative team didn't see coming, is picking up a comic series is easier than doing a TV series. But what I wanted to ask, it's two-pronged. One, did you ever imagine you would see the end game here with The Boys when all of that was going on, for the comic book end of things?
I couldn't believe that the thing would just falter and die there. There was a brief period when DC were talking about perhaps continuing it at Vertigo rather than Wildstorm, in what would have very obviously been an extremely neutered form. But fortunately, that idea didn't last long. Throughout the period, I can remember thinking, let's just get on with it. Let's find a new publisher. Let's finish the story. I've said before that having a kind of a cause célèbre on your hands like that can be momentarily amusing, but really it is an interruption in the creative life of the book. It's something you want to get over with, and if you can exploit it, if you can exploit that controversy and notoriety to help your sales, then that's fine. But otherwise, I see very little point to it at all. It was something that I wanted to get past so that I could get on with finishing the story. I did, after all, have a definite ending in mind for The Boys, and a pretty good idea of how the thing would develop over the 5 or 6 years. Unlike Preacher, which was more of a leap into the dark with fingers crossed. So yeah, on the whole, yes, I could see an end to it, and yes, I was focusing on getting past that speed bump so that I could get back to work.
And the second part of that is more, did you think either during that initial speed bump or the actual length of the Dynamite publishing, that the third season, the sixth episode of the third season, would have an episode called Heroghasm on the largest streaming platform, maybe I guess in the world. Did you ever think that was going to happen?
I wasn't thinking in those terms. I wasn't thinking in that kind of detail. There was film and TV interest in the boys almost from the get-go. There's no doubt about that. But when you hear that, vague notions occur to you about who it would be interesting to see cast, what it would be like to see certain sequences brought to life, but you don't really think, I don't really think in much detail beyond that. So while I'm delighted that has worked out, no, it wasn't something that really occurred to me. The whole Heroghasm thing came about, or the title came about. There was a shoe store here in New York at the time called Shoegasm, and I'm not even sure if it's still in business. I mean, everything was gasm at one point or another. But I saw that and I can remember thinking, that is the stupidest bloody thing I've ever heard of. How ridiculous. I can't believe, wait a minute. And that was when something went click. So that's how Heroghasm came about. But no, you're not really thinking in those terms when you're writing a book. You're just focusing on telling the story and getting it out there.
Yeah, I just think it's amazing that, they're literally, when I watched that episode last week and saw the words Heroghasm flash on my screen, I mean, no matter how they portrayed it versus how the comic portrayed it, or all the things they're doing, just seeing all those titles of scripts that you wrote, storylines that you wrote, things from the book just flash on the screen. It's really great, no matter what they do with it, it's a cool thing. So let's see. We talked about the format. We talked about the books. We talked. One thing I think I saw is, has all of your stuff been collected into like your kind of preferred way of it being? Have they done big Hitman collections, big hardcover Hitman collections?
No, the whole book has been collected, I'm pleased to say, but in paperback. It would be nice to see hardcovers and so on. When I talked earlier about getting books into large collections and so on, they don't necessarily have to be very expensive, high quality hardcovers. They just need to be something durable that will allow people to continue to find the book, something that will allow the story to live, as I said earlier, in perpetuity. But certainly, high quality editions of anything are always welcome.
Yeah, for sure. So we got a couple of things sent our way. One, and maybe you've seen this, but I don't know if you've ever been a Jeopardy question before, or if your work has been.
Yeah.
A user by the name of Tasty Tide Pod brought it to our attention that the Jeopardy question, I don't know when this was, but A-Train and Homelander leave a bit to be desired as superheroes on this Amazon show based on Garth Ennis's work. What is Preacher?
It's obviously Six-Pack and Dog Welder. Yeah. Yeah, famous last.
Yeah. And then another user, Jesus Guide Me, asked, who is your favorite character to write in the series? I think I know the answer, and I think you've probably answered this question a million times, and I'll just throw a slight twist. Was there anyone in the series that you didn't initially enjoy writing, or wasn't as it just didn't click as much, and then did down the line?
Well, obviously my favorite character was Butcher, with his wife Becky a close second. Even though she doesn't really get much of a starring role, she was a pleasure to write, just as one of the most kind and decent characters I've ever written. Butcher's more interesting because of, well, for a variety of reasons. The main one being that he personifies my unfortunate view of life, which is bad men make the world and bad men fix it. As Butcher himself says, it's what we get up to in our spare time that you need to worry about. It's also the possibilities that the character had, the way his life could have gone, the way it nearly did, but sadly didn't, that make him interesting. Your second question about characters that I didn't like.
Was there someone that was
click?
yeah.
I can't really think of anyone who I didn't like writing. I mean, that may be a product of a creator-owned book where you're coming up with all the characters, so you're going to tend to come up with someone who you enjoy writing, essentially, as opposed to someone who becomes a pain in the ass for you. But I can remember thinking that Monkey Kessler was a character who I was just going to despise throughout, and he certainly does have a rough ride of it. I mean, things go horribly wrong for him and stay there. And yet I ended up developing not sympathy for him, but perhaps an understanding that as a bad guy, he was small fry, that there was far, far worse, and that wretches like him are sometimes necessary in the plans of bigger, better bad guys. And that is probably why Monkey made it and got out intact. And as we saw in Dear Becky, even did quite well for himself, because in the end, maybe he was just too pathetic and wretched for me to hurt too much.
Speaking of, and I don't know if I meant to mention this earlier. I'm not sure if it got cut off or not, but we have the Dear Becky hardcover coming out, and also the script book, which is something that I think we started talking about maybe at the tail end of the pandemic. Right. And whose scripts did you first find in order to figure out, here's how I write these things called comics, and how did you find them? It's a whole different world now. I remember back in the day, Alan Moore scripts would make the rounds. They were printed because there was no internet, so somebody had a copy or whatever it was, or treatments that had never been used for comic book projects that never came off. But who was it that you started with, and how did you get it?
When I was a kid, one of John Wagner's Judge Dredd scripts was reprinted in a 2000 AD annual. And very simple, very basic. It was one of those features that just shows you, the kid, how your favorite comic is put together. So here's the script, here's the artist's pencils, and you can say, oh, okay, the writer tells the artist what to draw. The artist then draws it, and you then see it being inked and lettered up. And it's like, oh, okay, so the writer supplies the dialogue, which is then lettered onto the art. John's scripts are famously sparse. Things like Dredd on bike. Anyone else, even myself, would say something like Judge Dredd is patrolling the streets of Mega City 1 on his Lawmaster bike. He is alert for danger. He knows that trouble can come at any time. Okay, I probably wouldn't write that, but my point is, John got what most people would write down to 3 words: Dredd on bike. And if you know the history of Judge Dredd, you know that some incredible art has been inspired by those 3 words. Anyway, that's who I learned scripting from. And I try to keep my scripts pretty basic, pretty sparse to this day, to give the artist no more than what he needs to avoid bogging him down. Alan Moore, yes, his scripts are famously loquacious. I think that's Alan partly keeping himself interested and partly just covering all the bases and throwing ideas out there, in some cases that the artists can perhaps choose from rather than use all of. But as I've said before, what works for Alan Moore will not necessarily work for you, budding writer. And so there have been numerous attempts over the years to copy Alan, not just in his writing style, but in his scripting style. And that's why you get sort of second and third and fourth generation would-be Alan Moores trying to do what the man does and failing, of course. I remember Steve Dillon telling me about a script he got where a panel description involved a great deal of detail on the music he should be listening to and the kind of imagery he should have going on in his head while he was drawing the panel. And it was things like baby skulls and people crucified upside down and the streets running with blood and so on. But when he took a yellow highlighter to actually mark what was required to be drawn, it was a guy walking down the street.
Red on bike.
Exactly. Yeah. There was no the musical suggestions meant nothing. The sort of background mental imagery he was required to focus on meant nothing. It was guy walks down street. So again, what Alan Moore does will not work for you.
Right. And you're also fortunate in the sense of you know who's going to be drawing. You're not just turning in a script to a random person down the line that you're never going to see or talk to. You're not at that point. So which is fortunate. You know, you can there's a big difference in the way you approach a script if you know who's going to draw it versus if you don't know who's going to draw it. So
most of the time that's true. Most of the time I know who's going to draw it. I do find that keeping script sparse is a good idea in either case. Overloading it with detail is not necessarily going to help someone you haven't worked with before any more than someone you've been working with for 10 years.
Right. So what else do you have coming? I think I saw that the last issue of Lion and the Lion and the Eagle was out a couple weeks ago.
That's right.
And I imagine that there's going to be a nice collection. That was a beautiful looking book, absolutely gorgeous looking book.
It certainly was. Tim Bradstreet's covers were lovely. PJ did a great job on that book. Let's see, there is going to be a collected edition of that. Hawk the Slayer is running. There's going to be a collected edition of that, of course. New series of Jimmy's Bastards, the imaginatively titled Jimmy's Little Bastards. It's a generational thing. Will begin in August, and towards the end of the year there'll be a new Punisher book called Get Fury.
Nice.
And beyond that, I should also mention that the Battle Action Special just launched in the UK and will be available here, I believe, in September.
Okay.
Beyond that, there'll be some more things for 2000 AD. There'll be a new horror book, and there might be a few other old stories coming back. I might be revisiting a few other old favorites in 2023. We'll have to see.
Nice. And then a quick note, we'll be I forget what state it is. Connecticut?
I think
Connecticut?
So. Terrific.
Mohegan Sun, does that sound right?
That sounds right. Yeah,
a casino. We'll both be at a casino where they're having a comic convention in July. So
that's right.
That should be fascinating.
End of the month.
What could go wrong? So, all right. Well, thank you very much for your time. And everyone get out there, check out the books. And if you watch the show, you haven't read the comic, you owe it to yourself to check out the comic. It's what fueled everything that they're doing in the show. It's great stuff. I'm biased, but it's great stuff. So, all right, cool. Thanks, Garth.
Cheers.